Hey, how's it going guys? My name is Dom and today we're going to be building a workout tracker using HTML, CSS and JavaScript, alright? So there's going to be no external frameworks or libraries used for this solution today, and it's a great beginner to intermediate project in JavaScript, alright? Now, this right here is going to be the finished product. As we can see, we've got a row of different workouts which the user has submitted. Now, these are going to persist using local storage, which means if I was to refresh the page here, we're going to keep those entries. I can do things such as add a new entry just like this. I can change the workout type. I can update the minutes and also the date. All right, now I'm also able to delete an entry, for example, something like this. It's going to now go away, and as we can see, once again, it's going to save those changes once the page refreshes. All right, so this right here is relatively straightforward to do, and we're going to be doing so using JavaScript classes. All right, so going inside this tab right here, we're going to begin from scratch to create what I just showed you, and the source code is going to be linked down below if you would like to download and follow along while you watch today's video. All right, so going inside the text editor right here, we're going to begin with this setup right here. So I've got this index HTML with no content inside the body, and I've linked up a CSS style sheet which points to css/main.css, which is currently empty. I've also got a JavaScript file linked up to JS, then /main.js, also empty, but very importantly, I'm using a type of module here. This is going to ensure that only once the document has been parsed by the browser, the code is going to execute, and also it's going to allow us to use JavaScript import-export syntax for modules. All right, so very important. You guys have the exact same setup here when it comes to your CSS and script tags. So make sure you got these two files included and created on your own text editor, and we can begin inside the HTML. So as usual for these types of videos, I'm going to show you the HTML for the actual application first, then work on the CSS, then lastly work on the JavaScript. All right, so when it comes to the HTML for this workout tracker, we can begin by creating a new div with a class of app, or my mistake, an ID of app. So this right here is going to be the main container for the app. All right, inside here now, we can create a new table with a class of tracker. So this table, of course, is going to be the table which I showed you at the very beginning of today's video. You're going to also need to have a table head right here with a table row and then some table header cells just for, of course, your main headers at the top of the table. We can say date, then we can do workout, and lastly, just duration. And a fourth th here, which is going to be empty just to make space for our delete button in the actual rows themselves. Okay. We can also create an example row. So this table body now is going to have a class of entries. So we're actually going to have two table bodies inside the table here. The first one is going to be just for the entries, and the second table body is going to be for the last footer here to, of course, hold the add entry button. Okay, so going back inside the text editor, let's have a sample entry inside the table body here. So we can say tr and then do td. Now for the date, we're going to use an input type of date right here. We're going to remove the name and ID, and we can just give this a class of tracker _ date. So once again, using the block element modifier naming convention on my channel, but you can use whatever naming convention you like for these class names. Okay. That right there is for the date input. Now, I did forget to I actually duplicated the table row here. So my mistake, guys. Just update this tr to be a td. Okay, the next input here for single row is going to be the select drop down. So we can create a new select right here with a class of tracker underscore underscore workout to of course hold the option for which workout the user wants to enter. So you got things like, walking, running, cycling, whatever it might be. So I'll just copy and paste the options which I used in the example at the beginning of today's video. And they look something like this. So you guys can add your own workouts in if you want, but make sure you've got a value of essentially the same thing as your display option, but of course, make everything lowercase for consistency and use dashes instead of spaces in between your labels, okay? Cool. The last input here is going to be, of course, the duration in minutes. So we can use an input type of number right here. And once again, just giving this a class. This one's going to have a class of tracker underscore underscore duration. Okay. Now with this one here, we're also going to require a span with a class of tracker underscore underscore text. And this right here is just going to say minutes, just so we have some space between the input and then just some text to demonstrate that this number is in fact in minutes. All right. The last table cell here before we take a look at some progress is going to be the button to delete a single entry. So this one is going to have a class of tracker underscore underscore button. Also make sure you use a type of button here. This is going to prevent a form from being submitted if your button happens to be inside a form, just in case, right? And then inside the button text, we can just say and times to give us a little X or times or multiplication icon. Okay, cool. I'm just going to save this right here and check on some progress. So back in the browser, if I do a refresh here, we get something like this. So we have, of course, the table header. We've got an example row, and now we just need the last row for the footer to, of course, hold that add entry button. Okay, so going back inside here, we are now going to create the second table body right here, and we can give this a tr. The class of this tr is going to be tracker underscore underscore row, and also tracker underscore underscore row dash dash add. So I did actually forget to include a class on the above row. So my mistake, sorry about that. I'll just copy this class right here and place it in the above entry table row. It's important that we have, of course, the tracker row class so we can actually style it using CSS. But of course, this row here is not going to get that extra class here of tracker underscore underscore row add. So this extra class is just indicating that this row is going to hold the add button. Now, once we're inside this table row, we can create a new TD here with a col span of 4 columns. That way it's going to take up the entire width of the table itself. And inside here, a simple span with a class of tracker underscore underscore add. Then we can say something like add entry and use and plus to give us a plus icon. Now, one thing to note here is that this span is going to behave like a button. So it actually might be better if you guys were to use a button element here instead and just style it specifically. But I wanted to use the span just to make it easier to differentiate this button and this button in today's video. So yeah, like I said, maybe use a button here. It's better semantics, obviously. Cool. So now we have the whole HTML structure for the tracker back in the browser. On a refresh, we have something like this. So now let's use CSS to style up all of this stuff right here. It's also important to note that we're going to be using JavaScript in order to inject this HTML into the document. So eventually we're going to be removing all of this stuff right here and letting the JavaScript do it for us. All right, so moving on to the CSS here, we're going to begin by targeting the class of tracker. So basically targeting that entire table. Going to give this a font size of 14px as a base font size, a border collapse of collapse to remove the space between every single cell and row, and a width of 600 pixels. I'll save this, go back in the browser, and we get something like this. So a very minor change. We can also target the tracker table itself, as well as everything inside the table, and give it a font family of, now this is where you can provide your own font family. I'm just going to stick with sans serif, okay? Save this back in the browser, and we have this right here. So we can see by using the asterisk, we are also able to target the input fields themselves, okay? Now back inside here, we can now begin to target every single table header in the top row. Give this a font size of 1.15 EM. The usage of EM here is going to reflect this font size right up here. So this is like the base font size. 1.15 just means 1.15 times the current base font size of 14. So whatever 14 times 1.15 is, that is what the font size of the table header is going to be. Also give this a text align of left, as well as a font weight of normal to remove some of the browser's default styling. Give this a color of white just to contrast the background, which is going to be 009578. That is the dcode green color. Back in the browser and refresh here, and we have something like this, okay? We can now begin to target every single one of those table header cells once again, as well as every single regular table data element. So for this one, we're going to say a padding of 0.75 EM. Save this back in the browser. Now we can see that padding is also going to, apply to your regular cells as well as your table header cells. Okay, cool. Now, next step is going to be to target every single tracker row. So we're going to give this a base background of EEE. So it might actually be better here to explicitly target every tracker row inside the entries table body. So I'll just add here dot entries, then tracker row. Now, to be honest, I probably should have called this class here tracker __ entries. So my mistake right there. So I'll make this now tracker __ entries, then targeting every single row inside there. Now for this one, that's perfectly fine. So back in the browser, we're going to get that very light gray there. The reason for this light gray is because we want to actually differentiate this row or these rows from the bottom add entry row. So more on that later. But for now, we're going to also say here, look, we're going to say every other tracker entry row, let's make it a darker background color. So every second is what I mean. So we can say here tracker entries, tracker row, then we can say nth child, then put in odd here. So every odd tracker row, we can say background and make this a darker gray. So now back inside here, if I duplicate this a few times, so the table row, back in the browser, refresh, we're going to get that alternating background color on those rows right there. So just a stylistic thing, so your user knows that this row here is sort of this, if it's a small screen size or the list gets long, that could be an issue. So we have that alternating color. I might just remove the other table rows just back to 1. There we go, easy. Now, we can now start to style up the input fields themselves. So back inside here, we're going to target tracker __ date, then the workout, and then lastly, the duration. So for every single input field, the number input field, the dates, the drop down right here, we're going to apply some standard styles. So it's going to be firstly a display of inline block, as well as a box sizing of border box, and a font size of 1 EM. So this right here intends to make all of them have the same height. Back in the browser, refresh, and we can see now that, well, we don't get all the same height. That's actually because we didn't add the height property. Seems obvious, right? So let's make a height here of 2.5 EM. And while we're at it, we can also add some padding of 0.5 EM left and right, or top and bottom, should I say, and 0 for left and right. Back in the browser, refresh, and now we have something like this. Okay, so we can see here, of course, every single input field is going to have the exact same height, which of course is what we want. Okay, we can now head back inside here and we can be giving all of these a border of none, an outline of none, and a background of none. Now you can optionally keep your border in if you prefer to have the white background here. Honestly, I don't mind it now that I'm seeing it, but I'll refresh here and now we have a very similar situation to what we had at the beginning of today's video. Cool. So we can now go ahead and sort of reduce the size of this duration input field right here. So back in here now, we can target the tracker duration explicitly, and we're going to say here a width of 5 EM, and we're also going to be text aligning this to the right. Back in the browser, refresh, and we can see now if I was to provide a value for the duration, it's going to be on the right side, and of course it's a much smaller width, so the overall row looks a bit better. Okay, cool. We can now begin to style up the close or the delete button. Back inside here now, we can target tracker __ buttons. So for these delete buttons, we're going to be giving this a display of flex, okay, and align items of center and a justify content of center. These three properties here are going to horizontally and vertically center the icon in the middle. Going to also give this a background of none, a border of none, and an outline of none. We're going to be giving the user feedback through the means of a hover pseudo class. Okay. Also give this a color of red, a font size of 1.5 EM or 1.5 times the current font size. That also goes for the width here, the height, the padding, and so on. Okay. And lastly here, a margin left of 0.5 EM to create some space between the delete button and the previous column, and a cursor of pointer to tell the user, yes, you can indeed click on this button. Save this, go back in the browser, refresh, and we get something like this. So now let's apply that pseudo class on hover to, of course, give the user some visual feedback. We can say tracker button :hover, give this a background of RGBA 0, 0, and 0, then 0.1 for a 10% opaque black. Let's put the colon right there and we're good. Go back in the browser, refresh, and we get something like this when hovering over. Now, optionally, you can also have a border dash radius on your button to be something like 50%. It's going to give you now a rounded, background. So back in the browser, refresh. Now we have this rounded here. It's up to you guys, but look, that's an option. Cool. So back inside here now, we've styled up the main parts. We now need to move on and start styling up the footer section with that add entry. Okay, cool. So inside here now, we can target the tracker __ row, this time -- add, because remember, we have this add modifier on this class right here just for the row containing the add entry button. Okay, so inside here for this row, we're going to simply give this a border top of 3px solid and then 333 for a dark gray. And the same goes for the border bottom, just to give it a bit of distinction. Now, I'm going to also give this a background of white. Now, while this isn't really necessary because it is already white, it's going to be explicit that way. If you change the background color, it's not going to be different. So back in the browser, refresh, and we get something like this around the bottom section. Okay. We can now go back inside here and we can start to actually target the table cell itself. So we're going to say tracker row add, then target the TD inside there, give it a text align of right to simply push over the button on the right side. Okay. Now we can actually begin to target the tracker __ add, which this right here needs to actually be on, it's already there, so my mistake. So we have that tracker add class on the button. So targeting the button itself, give this a display of inline - block, some padding of 0.8 top and bottom and 1 EM for left and right, a color of green for the text, and then lastly a cursor of pointer. Okay. And as a very last step here, we're going to also target the hover pseudo class when hovering over the add button. We can simply make the background, once again, the same thing, 1% or 10% opaque black. Save this, go back in the browser, refresh, and now we get this right here for our CSS. So we are done with the HTML and the CSS. We can now begin on the JavaScript and of course do the job of moving all of this HTML right here into, Okay, so moving on to the JavaScript here, we're going to begin by creating a new file inside the JS directory called workouttracker.js. So this file right here is going to contain a class which is going to contain all of the code related to the workout tracker. So the first step here is going to be to say export default class and call this class workout tracker. Now, if you're not too comfortable with JavaScript classes, I've got a couple of videos dedicated just to them if you want to watch those before continuing on with this video right here. But anyway, this export default is going to allow us to then import this class into our main.js file. This is only possible when we have the type of module on the script tag. So very important right there. Now going back inside the workout tracker, we're going to define a constructor. Now, this constructor is going to take in a root element. Basically, this root is going to be this div with the ID of app. So then we're going to start injecting all of the HTML and the table using JavaScript into, of course, that root element. Okay, cool. Going to leave this empty just for now and then go inside the main.js and simply import the workout tracker from /workouttracker.js. So very important, of course, to have that .js at the end there. And now we can simply say, look, const app is equal to get element by ID. We're going to now pass in the ID of app. So now, of course, app here refers to the app in the HTML, this div right here. We're now going to say, let's make a new instance of workout tracker. The workout tracker instance is going to be for this particular div right there with the ID of app. So, of course, passing that in right there. Okay, I'll save this, go back in the browser, do a refresh here. As we can see, nothing happens. So now we can begin to, of course, implement some code inside the constructor. So the first step here is going to be to hold a reference to the root elements. The reason for this is because we want to be able to do things with the elements inside there as we move on to the rest of the code. All right, so we can say here, this.root is equal to root, hold a reference to it. And secondly here, this.root.insert adjacent HTML. Okay, so we're going to be inserting some HTML into the div. All right, we're going to be doing that after begin. So basically as the first element of the div itself. Okay, then we're going to say workouttracker.html. So we are yet to define this HTML static method. This HTML is going to return us essentially an HTML string of all of this table right here. So back inside here, we can say static HTML, then we're going to return that string. All right, so I'll say return here, then using JavaScript template strings, the backticks near the 1 on your keyboard. We can now use multi-line strings for this right here and simply copy what you had in the previous HTML file. So copy all of your table right here and then paste it inside your return right up here. Okay, we can just indent this real quick and we have something like this. And now we're basically injecting that HTML using JavaScript, but we are going to need to simply remove our example entry because when the page first loads up, of course, we have to go to local storage to fetch the actual data and not display the example row, which we use for styling CSS. Okay, so we have the basic structure of the app itself, which means now we can simply comment out this table right here and let the JavaScript insert it for us. Back in the browser, we should see no difference aside from that missing row. Refresh, and we get exactly that right there. Cool, so now we can go back inside the JavaScript and we're now going to say, look, once we have the basic structure working for the tracker, we can say this.load entries. Then we can say this.update view. So we are yet to define these two methods right here, but basically we're going to first load the entries in from local storage. Then we're going to say update view. So get those entries and then update the HTML table to display them to the user. All right, cool. So now we're going to simply go right down here and we're going to define that load entries method. So this one right here is going to be really straightforward. It's going to create a new instance property. It's going to be called this.entries. It's going to be equal to here json.parse. Okay, so we're going to be parsing some JSON. So that JSON is going to come from local storage. And of course, we're using JSON to store every single entry. So I'll show you this visually very shortly, but for now, we can say local storage.getItem. Going to pass in here workout tracker dash, or my mistake, workout dash tracker dash entries. Okay. Now, if it's the first time the user is loading up the site, there are going to be no entries or no items inside local storage with this key here. So we can say here, look, if there's none, or then we can say empty array inside a string to, of course, give us valid JSON. I'm going to save this right here. Go back in the browser. I want to show you real quickly. I want to show you the demo from the beginning of today's video. So we can see here in the network tab, in the application tab of Chrome, we have the local storage key called workout tracker demo entries. Of course, we used workout tracker entries because this one here is, of course, the demo or the demonstration. But it works in the same way. So as we can see here, the value for this local storage key is that JSON string. It's an array of our workout objects. We have the dates, duration, and of course the workout itself. So this is how the data is going to be stored. And of course, when we say when we say json.parse, we are simply, taking that JSON and of course converting it into a regular JavaScript array. All right. Cool. Now, it's also going to be the opposite. It's going to be saving those entries back. So we can see here that we get the entries, assign that instance property called entries. We're going to also say save entries. This right here is going to do the opposite. It's going to say local storage.setItem. We're going to set the item of workout-tracker-entries. Then we can say here, let's set that to be json.stringify. So convert from the JavaScript array into JSON. This dot entries just like that. Now, one important thing here is that we actually don't have a default value for the entries array. So let's go up here. We can say this dot entries is going to be equal to an empty array just by default, just in case this method here doesn't run or something like that. It's just for completeness, really. So now we're able to load entries into our workout tracker. I do want to go back inside the main.js here, and I want to say const wt equal to workout tracker. So we have this reference to our instance. Okay, we can now say console.log, or we're going to say here window.wt equal to wt, because I want to actually be able to use the JavaScript console to inspect what WT is. Okay. Back inside here, in the Chrome tab here, I want to just simply go inside the application tab and assign a new key to workout-tracker-entries. Okay. This value is going to be an empty array. We're going to pass through here an object. We can say dates of 2022-03-03. The workout is going to be swimming, and the duration can be 5 minutes. Okay, so we have this sample workout. I'll hit enter right here. Then I'm going to say refresh, go inside the console, and I'm going to say, oops, my mistake. What's going on here? So load entries. Back inside here, yep, I forgot a bracket, I think, maybe. json.parse. What's going on here? This has got to be really obvious, and I'm just not seeing it for some reason. So it reckons it's on this line here. Was that the line? Ah, okay. It was my JSON. This is why you don't write out JSON manually, okay? Let's go inside here again. Okay, I forgot to put double quotes around my duration. There we go. Cool. Let's try again, refresh, go in the console. Now we can say WT to inspect it. And of course, we have this error here. Let's quickly define this method before jumping back into inspecting that JSON. So I'm going to say here, update view, and make it do nothing for now, right? Refresh again, and this time we should be good. So WT, and we have the workout tracker. So as we can see here, the entries is a JavaScript array containing the item which I just entered inside local storage. Now, of course, we're going to be using JavaScript to insert more rows into here because that's obviously much better, and you don't get the same problem with human mistake where you might forget to put double quotes. So this is how it's going to work, right? So we load the data from local storage, then of course we can save it in the exact same way. All right, so when it comes to updating that view, we can now take the loaded entries and then of course display them as table rows. All right, so inside the update view, okay, the first step is going to be to get a reference to the table body. So where are all the entries going to be stored? It's going to be this.roots.query selector. And we're going to get the elements with a class of tracker __ entries. Of course, this here refers to our T body with that entries class. Okay. We're going to also define a new method called add row equal to. It's going to take in a data object and it's going to give us it's actually going to add that HTML row to our entries T body. But it's going to be empty just for now. We're going to come back to it very shortly. Okay. The next step of update view after you've defined your two things up here is going to be to simply say table body dot query selector all. So we're going to select every single existing table row inside the table and then delete it from the view. So we're not deleting the entries, the data themselves, only the rows which represent the data. So we're going to select right inside here. What is it? It's going to be tracker __ rows. So for every single row, so for each, okay, we're going to say here row. Then we're going to say, look, simply this dot delete. Oops, my mistake. Sorry, guys. Row.delete. So remember, of course, we're not going to be affecting the add entry row because we're targeting only inside tracker entries with this, selector right up here. So let's delete every single existing row if there is any. Okay. Then we're going to say this.entries.forEach. For every single entry fetched from the local storage, we can just say here the function, and it's going to say add row, okay? And it's going to pass in the data. Of course, the data here comes from our for each. So for every single object inside the entries array, let's add that row in. Okay, I'll save this, go back in the browser, and of course we get nothing because we are yet to define the add row. So this here is going to do the thing for us. I want to say here console.log real quick just to demonstrate its usage. So save this back in the browser, refresh, and of course we have that object. So we're working with this object right here with the date, duration, and workout. So for our object, all right, we're going to say const template equal to a new document template right here. The reason for this is because we want to be able to then inject some HTML into the template to give us a reference to that table row element itself in the JavaScript. Okay, we can say let row equal to null for now. We're going to reassign this later on to, of course, contain whatever the template contains. Okay, then down here we're just going to say, look, template inner HTML is equal to, and here is where we're going to need a second method like this one, a static one, to give us the HTML for a single row. So we're going to say here HTML is going to be equal to, then say workout tracker dot row HTML, just like that. Okay, going to say also here dot trim because we don't want that extra white space to be included inside our template. Then we're going to say here, look, row is going to be equal to template.content.firstElementChild. So once we have the HTML injected for that row, we can now simply get a reference to it in the JavaScript. And with that reference, we're going to say, look, table body.append child, we're going to add that row to the table body. Remember, this row here is actually an HTML element object in JavaScript representing our newly created row. So this row HTML method right here now needs to be defined. So let's copy what we had for the static HTML and call this one now row HTML. We can now copy the example row from earlier on, of course, this one right here. So tracker__row, and paste it inside the return for this right here. Okay, cool. So now if I save this, go back in the browser, do a refresh here, we have something like this. So we have this basically empty row for that single entry that we found inside the local storage. Okay. So we now need to simply get the data and populate those input fields with the actual data from local storage. So back inside the text editor here, let's drop down inside the add row once again, and we're going to say here row.querySelector. Let's begin with the date. We'll say a class of tracker__date, so just selecting that date input field. Then say .value equal to data.date. Of course, data coming from the argument or the parameter right up there. A few more times for the workout, then just say data.workout, of course. Then say tracker__duration, data.duration. So now saving this and going back in the browser and refreshing, we have the actual data which we inserted right up here a little earlier on. So we see there it's displaying perfectly fine inside the table row. Cool. So now, also important to note that, with this drop down, the workout of swimming in all lowercase is important because this right here needs to match the value which you, of course, provided inside your option here. Okay, cool. Back inside here now, we're going to leave this section just for now, but we're going to say, look, we have to add events for input changing, and to do, we need to add events to delete the row. So we're going to come back to this later on to, of course, provide the update code and also the delete code. But for now, we're going to focus on adding a new entry to our app. Okay, so let's drop down to the bottom of our class here to find a new method called add entry. So it's going to take through here some data. So this data here represents an object of a single workout entry. So this is going to say this, right? It's going to say this dot entry is going to be equal to this, my mistake, sorry guys, this dot entries dot and push. We're going to push the data or the new object onto our existing entries array. We're now going to say this dot save entries to local storage. Then we're going to say this dot update view to refresh the entire view. Now, there might be better ways to go about this, such as not updating and clearing every single row, but that's going to be a little bit too complex for this video. I want to keep it simple, but of course, if you have multiple or if you have many rows inside your table, you can do some optimizations here to, of course, reduce that entire delete and then re-add everything. Okay, cool. So this add entry here, let's test it out. Go back in the browser. We're now going to say console wt dot add entry. We're going to add an entry. We're going to say something like, let's just do date is going to be, let's make it tomorrow's date, which is going to be the 4th or the 1st of April. We're going to give this a workout of, let's do outdoor-cycling. And lastly, a duration of, let's just do 45 minutes. Press enter and we get that right there. So what happened? This delete actually needs to be a remove. I always do this, guys. I apologize, but remove is the method to remove that from the DOM. Let's try again. I'll just refresh here, and it added it. Okay, so that's fine, but let's add it again just for clarity. Press add, and we get that second outdoor cycling row saved to local storage due to the fact that, of course, we said save entries inside that method right there. So now let's hook up this add entry to the actual add entry button. Going back to the top right up here, we can now say underneath everything else, I'm going to say here, look, this.root.query selector, selecting the class of tracker _ add for that add button. Then say add event listener. When that button gets clicked on, we're going to simply call the add entry method. But we need to first set up the date. So we're going to default the date to be the current date. So we'll say here, const date equal to a new instance of date right here. Then we can say const year equal to date.getFullYear. And we're simply just splitting up the year, month, and date for a simple format because our date field requires a year, month, day format. So we've got to provide that, okay? The month part of that format is going to be dates.getMonth. Then because month are 0 indexed, January is going to be 0, February 1, and so on. We can say +1 to that month. Then we can say .toString. We're going to need to, convert that singular digits of 7 or 6 or 4, whatever it is, then add a 0 in front of it. So toString, then .padStart. Going to require a minimum length of the string here to be 2 for 0 and then your number. And we're going to say the fill string is going to be a 0. So it's going to convert your single digit months to a 0 and then that digit. Of course, November and December is fine, and October, but anyway, so we have that formatting done. And lastly here, we're going to do the day. This is just simply going to be dates.getDay. Then we can do .toString once again to convert it to a string and then call that padStart method. So now I want to just console.log the year, the month, and the day just for clarity. Back in the browser, refresh, hit add entry, and we get 2022-03-03. So the 3rd of March 2022. Back inside here now, we can now simply say something like this.add entry. So the default entry for when you add a new one, like I said, it's going to be the current date. So we'll say here add dates of, then using the JavaScript template strings. Once again, backticks near the 1 on your keyboard, then say $ curly brackets to add an expression inside here. We can say year, then we can say dash, then we can say month, then dash, then we can say day. Once again, just to give us that year dash month dash day format. Okay. Next property is going to be your default workout. Let's just make this walking, keep it basic. And the duration default is going to be 30 minutes. Let's save this, go back in the browser, do a refresh here, press add entry, and we get that default data saved to local storage. Hit enter, and we can see it stays right there. Now it's going to be probably the main part, or not the main part, but the most interesting part, updating the rows. So of course you add this entry. What if I change it to like 50 or 3000, but make it 50, press refresh, and it goes back to 30. So to make an update, it's going to be pretty straightforward. Let's go back inside our add row. So adding those events for input changing. All right. So right up here, we're going to say, look, row.querySelector. Okay. We're going to be selecting here, once again, just those input fields. So we can say here tracker _ date. Then we can say .add event listener. When the date field changes, so of course using the change event right here, when the date changes, we're going to say data okay, dot date is equal to, then we're going to grab the target from the event object. So the target is simply going to be a reference to that same input field. So basically row.querySelector tracker date is the same object as target, the exact same thing. So we can say here target.value, whatever your current date is that you chose is going to be the new date on the data object. Because this data object is being passed around, okay, this actually comes from entries. It's a reference to the same object which exists inside entries. So when you update this property here, it's going to also update the object in entries for that date because it is the same object. So it's being passed around, right? Cool. Do the exact same thing now for the workout. We can say data.workout equals value. And the same thing for duration. Once again, data.duration equals that. But for all three things here, we have to add this.save entries because now that the data has been, of course, updated in the entries instance property right up here, we now need to save that change to local storage, of course, by calling save entries. Back in the browser, refresh, make this one 78 minutes, refresh, and it stays right there because, of course, in local storage, it is now being persisted inside our list of entries. Okay? Now, the last part of today's video is going to be to delete a row. All right? So it's going to work like this. Add a new method called delete entry. Then we can say data to delete. So this data to delete is essentially the same object as this one right here. So it's just a simple data object with your duration, workout, and date, okay? But we're calling it this just for differentiation inside the next line. That next line is going to be this.entries is equal to this.entries.filter. Then we're going to say, look, let's grab every single data or existing entry, and we're going to keep it in the list if it is not the data to delete. So we'll say here, data does not equal data to delete. So basically, it's going to filter out this particular object. And because, once again, this data to delete is going to be the same reference to what's inside the entries here, it's going to find it perfectly fine. Okay, cool. We can now say this.save entries, then this.update view once we've saved it. Okay, so an add entry and a delete entry is going to update the entire view once the changes have been committed. But of course, a update does not need to re-render the entire thing because, well, nothing really changed in terms of the other rows. So we have this delete entry. We can now simply call it. We can say, once again, inside the add row function, we'll say here, row.querySelector tracker __ delete, I believe it's called. Let's figure it out real quick. Where was it? Tracker button. All right. Let's add a tracker __ delete to our delete button. Makes sense. So we have our times right here. We'll say tracker __ delete inside that button. If it wasn't obvious, guys, also, because we're saying row.querySelector, if we select the tracker delete class, because this right here is the only class inside this particular row, the query selector is guaranteed to give you the one that is contained within that row. Okay. Add event listener. When you click on the delete button, we're going to simply say, okay, cool. You want to delete it. So we'll say here, this.delete entry, then pass in that data object from the parameter right up here. Then lastly, of course, this.save entries to commit that entry, or no, we don't actually need to do that because that's already handled by the delete entry. So we can avoid doing that and we're basically done. So back in the browser, refresh here. We're going to delete this row and it's gone. We can see it just went away from here, right? I can refresh it and that's basically it. Now, one last thing to consider might be to actually store your local storage key inside a static constant. So right up here at the beginning of your class, we can say something like this: static local storage data key equal to, then say workout-tracker-entries. And now when we have our two references to our our actual key here, we can replace this with simply workout tracker.local storage data key, and it's going to do the exact same thing, but of course keeps the code free from repetition in those two instances. You update it once, it's going to be fine. You won't get weird bugs. Save this back in the browser, refresh, and we get the exact same result. Add an entry, refresh, and it's still there. So that is how to create a workout tracker using HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. Hope you guys enjoyed today's video. If you did, drop a like and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.